Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I hope that you are very, very well. I'm in yet another room because we are in a heat wave in September. It's 30 degrees outside, which means my room that I usually film in is a sauna. So I'm in the sitting room. Today's autumnal drink is an iced pumpkin spice latte. It is too hot for anything else, but honestly it's delicious. I'm so glad I made this decision. So today I'm bringing you my August wrap up. Now I read a lot of books in August, 15 to be precise, because August was the tropical readathon. I think this is my third year in a row doing this readathon in August. I don't work very much in August because I usually work in school term times, so it was nice to like just get stuck into some books and, you know, have more free time, read a load of books. It was great. As always, I'm going to be ranking my reading wrap up. I'm going to start with my least favourite, work my way up to my favourite, and I've also put in the description where I got all the books from, so which ones were sent to me for review, etc. So yes, I think that's all the preamble. So let's get straight into the books because there are 15 to talk about. So the least favourite book that I read in August, which I gave 2 stars to, was Brittle by Beth Overmyer. So this is a fae fantasy, and I haven't historically enjoyed fae fantasy, but that's not because it's fae. You know, the things that I didn't like about certain very well-known books about fae are not the fae. So I thought I would give this one a go when I had the opportunity to review it. It looked really interesting. It's seemed very sort of girl powery, and it was inspired by fables and folklore, which is my jam. So I was like, yes, I can't wait. And then I read it, and okay, so here's the thing. I didn't like ACOTAR. I don't like ACOTAR. I DNF'd it. We will start with that. And this felt a bit like, to be very, this is, you know, perhaps an oversimplification, but it felt a little bit like knockoff ACOTAR. And if you don't like ACOTAR, you're not going to like this. So yeah, it was too similar to existing popular fae books for my liking. I'm not a fan of this like hyper misogynistic world. I think it could be so much more interesting, much more nuanced if something original was written. Yeah, I didn't particularly enjoy this, but I do know some people who will. So I'm going to give it to someone who I know will enjoy it, because reading is subjective. So yes, that's my 2-star thoughts on Brittle. Moving up into the 3 stars, we have Dear Prudence by Karen Janowski. This is romance, a kind of sort of semi-literary fiction romance, I would say. And I did really, really enjoy the romance between the 2 main characters, which is of course what you're here for with a romance. You have to root for those 2 main characters, for that main couple, and I 100% did. Both of these characters, they've come through a difficult time. So Prudence is trying to escape from her abusive ex and her abusive relationship. Sean has been in a very toxic relationship where he's been sort of pressured into taking certain jobs. He's being pressured into getting engaged by his parents, and they're both looking for a fresh start. The romance was great, really, really sweet, had such kind of tension to it. So much will they, won't they? Even when they were, I was like, will they, won't they? Again, there wasn't very much nuance in this. I would have really liked for, I don't know, all of the good guys were so good. Like, they were all flawless human beings who were good to a fault. Like, their flaw was that they were too nice. Whereas all of the bad guys were just like incredibly manipulative and horrible and cruel, and there was no middle ground, there was no sort of grey area, and you know, some of the characters definitely should have been portrayed the way they were. Some of the characters, I think it would have been nice to have more nuance. So yeah, it was a mixed bag, this one for me. And then the other 3-star book that I read was Scareground by Angela Kasiewicz. And so this is very spooky, very atmospheric. I feel like from the cover and the title, you get the idea as to what it's about. And on that, it 100% delivered. It was so immersive. I really got those spooky vibes, and I was drawn straight into the story. As soon as I started reading, I think I read the whole thing, not technically in one sitting, but I read it in one set of sprints. Like, I just sat down and read it and had a great time. So we have this magical, spooky fairground, and the main character, Nancy, who feels like the mystery of her family past is tied up with this fairground. And so I really liked the character arc she went on. Some of the magical and fantastical elements felt a little bit random. There were a few different magical elements, and they all were very, very different. And I just wanted them to be tied together a bit more. Plus the characters read much younger than we were told they were. So yeah, another mixed bag, but very atmospheric and an enjoyable read. You can just sit down and devour this. We are already into the 4-star zone, which I think demonstrates how good of a reading month this was, that so many were 4 and 5 stars. So first up in the 4 stars, we have Mine by Marlene Hauser. This is about a woman in her late 30s and early 40s across the course of the book, who has always wanted to have a family. So she settles down, she is ready to have a baby, and then she discovers it might not be quite that simple. In the end, her fertility journey leads her to adopting. For this particular character, she decides after a few fertility treatments that adoption is the way forward for her, that she would much rather have a family than put herself through all of this, that the biological aspect doesn't matter so much to her given the struggle that she's going through. And what I really appreciated in this book is, yes, it's about one woman's journey. So many other women were featured and their journeys were discussed as well, and it was never kind of, this is the right or wrong way to do it. All of the different ways that these women had families were presented as equal, including the women who chose not to have a family, the women who went straight for adoption, the women who were egg donors or went through fertility treatments or never went through fertility treatments. Everything was kind of presented in a very matter-of-fact way, and I just really liked that. It was a nice sort of slice of life read, this one. So next up is America Is Not the Heart by Elaine Castillo. I read this for the Buzzword reading challenge because the prompt for August was a book with a body part in the title. This book is about a young woman who moves from Philippines to California, and it's about her journey as a queer woman, about her culture and her family, all sorts of different layers going on here. It was beautifully written, and so one of my pet peeves is authors that don't use speech marks. And this author did not use speech marks, and I didn't mind, which I think is, you know, a glowing recommendation, given that that is a pet peeve of mine. So yeah, beautifully written. There were lots of different characters going on, and I don't know, it just didn't quite all fall into place for me. But I did really enjoy this, and the writing style was really good. Next up is a novella, and it is Reading It Wrong by A.L. Lester. Now, you know me, I will read anything from A.L. Lester. I love their books, I love their characters, I love their romances, and this was really sweet and just a great little read. It was only about 70 pages long, and it tells the story of, it's a bit of a second chance romance, but what I quite liked is instead of being a second chance romance where it's like the lost love of their life, it was like, I asked you out, you turned me down, things have been weird, let's give it another shot, which I really liked. There was also a little sort of crime robbery subplot, which was just really nice, is to kind of carry the plot along. It's set in a little bookshop in South Wales. Of course I was going to love it. Next up is 5-Star Billionaire by Tash Orr. This is another 4-star read, ironically given the title, and I read this for my Round the World reading challenge, where every month I pick a book from another country and read it. This one is set in Shanghai, and it follows 4 or 5 different people, depending on how you count it, I guess. 4 main characters and 1 sort of ongoing side character that ties it all together in their journey to make it. And making it means something different for all of them. For some of them, it's financial success. For some of them, it's creative success. For some of them, it's having independence and following their own journey. And over the course of the book, their lives all start to intertwine, which I really like to see. And sometimes that was quite entertaining to see how their lives fit together. Or you'd have that moment of being like, oh no, such and such is father, but they're in a relationship with such and such. And yeah, that was kind of nice to see. Like the end of Love Actually, when you realise how they're all connected. And the reveal at the end as to who the 5-star billionaire was, I was not expecting. So yes, really enjoyed this. Next up we have a mystery, and I don't read that many mysteries, but I do really like this author's work, and it was The Man Who Lost His Pen by Gayleen Fraser. This is the second book in the series, and the first one was a sort of classic big thriller, and this one is more of a closed door mystery. It takes place backstage at a fundraising charity concert, and one of the big celebs who has been invited to the concert is found dead in his dressing room. He's had an allergic reaction and his EpiPen is nowhere to be found. To make it all more interesting, the reason the detective is there in the first place is that his boyfriend, who is another one of the performers, is the ex of the guy that was found dead. So you've got all of these different characters and everyone else there as well. All of their lives interweave. They've got all of this backstory. They all know each other from way back. They've got grudges. So it was really fun to see all of those different layers. The downside of having all of that complicated backstory between all the characters in a murder mystery is it was a long time until the murder happened. I think too long. That was the sort of thing that slowed the book down for me. But it was a great closed door mystery. So loved that. My top 4-star read was Scrap by Kathy Biggs. And part of the reason I picked this up is it is set down the road from me in Swansea. So that was really great. Love reading a local author. And also, this bugs me sometimes in books, is if a character is from a place that has a strong accent or dialect, but they're not written, their speech isn't written in that dialect. And in this book, I fully believed that every character was from Swansea, from how they spoke. And I loved that. As you can guess from the title, the story starts in a scrap heap. Mackie works for a scrap heap, and one day a boy is found in a car that is on the scrap heap, and this boy can draw pictures that kind of tell the future a little bit. So there's a bit of a magical realism element, and Mackie takes the boy under his wing. They sort of become a little bit of a family as they go to find their own families that they have lost for different reasons. It was a really, really sweet and heartwarming story. Really strong themes of mental health that I wasn't expecting, and just an enjoyable read all round. We're into the 5-star zone, and the first 5-star book that I'm going to tell you about is Between Wind and Water by Shauna Barnett. Now this is one of my most anticipated releases this year. I loved Windfall, the first book in the series, and this book did not disappoint. I'm not going to say much because it's a sequel. I don't want to really spoil what's going on, but if I tell you Sapphic Pirates, I don't know what else I really need to say. It was a great adventure, great characters, lots of really interesting themes explored, especially like relationship dynamics and recovering from toxic relationships, which is a really cool thing to see explored in historical pirate fantasy. Yeah, I need more, please and thank you. I want to know more right now. Next up is an audiobook, and honestly I did not expect to enjoy this book as much as I did. I loved it, and it is Happy Head by Josh Silver. It kind of reminded me of reading like Alex Rider books, or like The Maze Runner. Like that was the vibe, is that kind of adventure, bit of mystery, bit of sort of espionage kind of thing, but with a kind of dystopian twist. So the main character, Seb, is a boy in his late teens, and he is sent to Camp Happy Head, which is a new government initiative to help teenagers become happier adults. And the idea is to improve skills of independence and confidence and self-worth, all of those things that we know contribute to someone's positive mental health. But things aren't all happy at Happy Head. Some things are just downright weird. Some things are not okay or normal. And it's pretty clear pretty early on that there is something else at play here. It's such a great adventure. The audiobook narration was brilliant, and I also really liked the queer representation in this and the way that queer themes were used. I think for a story about happiness and being true to yourself, but also sort of mental health side of it and that sort of coming of age in the midst of what truth and happiness is a really interesting set of themes to explore with a queer lens. For the Emily Dickinson fans out there, the next book I read is Just Wide Enough for Two by Casey M. Martin. This is a historical fiction and it tells the romance between Susan Gilbert and Emily Dickinson. I loved this book so much. From the first sentence, I was like transported to 19th century Massachusetts. It was so immersive. You could just sort of sink into the story. The romance felt so real and emotional, and it was beautifully written. It was so moving and also felt very true to life. You know, it sort of felt like how a sapphic relationship of the era would go. Which is a perfect segue into the next book, The Low Road by Catherine Quarmby. So this tells the story of a young woman called Hannah in the early 19th century in England, and she watches her mother be killed, be executed, and her life gets worse from there, basically. Everything that happens leads to something else. She doesn't really have a choice. She's trying to make the best out of every situation, but it leads on to something that comes with its whole other set of difficulties. So the author is a journalist, and she specialises, her kind of thing is writing about some of the most marginalised people in society, telling their stories and advocating for them. And that really came across in this book. This book is all about the people who get forgotten, the people whose stories aren't told. And yeah, it was just really, really moving, beautifully written. And although it was about hardship and poverty and the difficulties faced, the main character's like tenacity and her, not quite optimism, but just her determination kind of balanced it out. It never felt too dark. And again, a sapphic romance, and I thought it was a really good depiction of what it would be like to be a queer person, especially, you know, the main character, she does not identify herself with our modern words, but we would call her bisexual nowadays, and seeing how she came to terms with that and saw that in herself was really interesting in a world that doesn't have those words. It was a truly incredible book. Really, really, really recommend it. Just read it. Okay, so I kind of feel bad pitting these two top books against each other and ranking them because they are just so different from each other. But I think this is the right decision. So, in second place for my August reads, we have Kitten Betsy by Tess Carletta. I read this in one sitting, or like one set of sprints. I loved it from start to finish. It's like a cosy cottagecore version of House in the Cerulean Sea, basically. So Betsy is immortal. He and his mother are the only two immortal beings left in the world, and then his mother is gone, and he has to be immortal all on his own. And he's determined to do it right, to not have any attachments, to not have nostalgia, to just live out his days as an immortal being. And so he sells his and his mother's house to a young man called Kit, who takes it over, and Betsy does not like what Kit does. He still sees it as his house and his home, and so they kind of have a begrudging friendship that eventually blossoms into romance. But of course it's not that simple, because Betsy is immortal. He's got baggage. I loved it. There was romance, sunflowers, pies. It was like every September read dream. So definitely pick up a copy. You will not regret it. And so we have made it to the best book that I read in August, and it was my non-fiction pick for August, and that is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. I came across this book a few years ago, around the same time I came across the story of Henrietta Lacks, and as a quick overview, Henrietta Lacks lived in the 30s, 40s, 50s. She died in the early 50s from cervical cancer, and some of her cancer cells were taken without her knowledge or consent for experimentation, and it turns out they were immortal. They could replicate for forever, and no other human cell line had ever been able to do this before. So her cells became the basis of all cellular medical research, including vaccines and chemotherapy. All of those, basically every major medical breakthrough of the past 70 years is thanks to her cells, which she didn't know she was even giving, which is how things were done, for better or worse, definitely worse, back in the day. But there is so much more to this story. So her family did not know that this was happening. Companies were profiting off selling her cells, and all of this is also tied in to race and class relations in America from the 1950s, actually before and up until now, and the way that healthcare plays a role in that. So there is so much going on. There is groundbreaking scientific discovery. There is family tragedy. There is discrimination. There's everything in this story. And I really like this kind of way of approaching a book, of taking one event in history and exploring basically every aspect of it. We learn about the scientist who developed the HeLa line of cells. We learn about her children and her grandchildren and her mother and her husband, as well as, of course, Henrietta herself. We learn about the impact she had on the world, the way that her story is told and how that has changed over the decades. There is so much in this book, and it's all worth knowing. It also read really easily. Sometimes non-fiction books, they can be a slog. This one read like a thriller. I could not put it down. It was just excellent on every single level. So that is it. Those are the books I read in August. Let me know what you read in August. If you've read any of these books, what did you think? Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. You can subscribe if you'd like to see some more videos from me. And I will see you next time. Ta-ra for now.